Clara Dawson was not the kind of woman who asked for help. Ever since her father had passed away, she had run the small family ranch on her own. The wind that swept across the plains seemed to whisper stories of independence and strength, and Clara took those stories to heart. Every morning she rose with the sun, feeding the cattle, mending fences, and tending to the small vegetable patch that her father had loved so much. Her hands were rough and calloused, but they were hers, and she wore them like a badge of honor. She had grown up hearing tales of the Wild West, of cowboys who roamed the plains, ranchers who battled storms and rustlers, and women who managed the impossible. Clara knew she could handle anything. She didn't need a man to help her. She didn't need anyone. Her ranch was her life, and she was determined to protect it with every ounce of her strength. One late afternoon, as she was repairing a broken fence along the edge of the property, she noticed a figure in the distance. Dust rose from the ground, marking the approach of someone on horseback. Clara squinted against the sun, her instincts alert. She didn't recognize the rider, and strangers were always cause for caution in these parts. The rider slowed as he approached, and Clara saw a man, tall and sturdy, with a hat pulled low over his eyes. His clothes were worn but clean, and there was an air of calm confidence about him. He reined in his horse and tipped his hat. "Evening," he called, his voice deep and steady. "Name's Jackson Hayes. I'm looking for work, just for a while." Clara paused, measuring him carefully. Work. She didn't need work. She didn't need anyone. She shook her head, her voice firm. "I don't need a ranch hand. This is my place, and I manage it myself." Jack, because that's what he called himself, nodded politely. "I understand. Maybe you just want someone to talk to, then?" Clara let out a short laugh, the kind that held both pride and defiance. "I don't need a man talking to me either," she said. She turned back to her fence, hammering the posts with renewed determination. She could feel his eyes on her, steady and patient, but she refused to look at him again. Over the next few days, Jack lingered nearby. He didn't intrude, but he could be seen helping with small tasks that Clara didn't ask for, stacking firewood, fixing a broken gate, and guiding a stray calf back to the herd. Clara watched him from a distance, her pride clashing with the practical relief she felt at his presence. One evening, after a long day in the fields, Clara found herself exhausted and sore. She had been repairing a section of fence damaged by a sudden windstorm, and the wood was splintering under her hands. Jack appeared silently at her side, carrying a sturdy plank. "You might want a hand with that," he said, his tone gentle. Clara stiffened. "I said I don't need help," she replied, though her voice had a hint of strain. Jack didn't argue. He simply placed the plank beside her and began working on his own section of the fence. Clara felt an odd mix of irritation and admiration. His hands moved with skill and care, and he worked quietly, never overstepping, never criticizing. That night, as the sun dipped below the horizon and painted the sky in shades of orange and pink, Clara sat on her porch, wiping her hands on a rag. She couldn't deny that Jack had been helpful, but she refused to give him credit aloud. Her father had always taught her to rely on herself, and she intended to follow his lesson to the letter. Still, she couldn't ignore the feeling of safety that came with knowing someone as capable as Jack was nearby. It was uncomfortable, almost unfamiliar. She had spent her entire life managing the ranch alone, and the thought of depending on someone else, even for a moment, made her stomach twist. A few days later, trouble came in the form of a sick horse. One of the ranch's best animals had fallen ill, and Clara realized she couldn't handle it alone. She tried to manage giving the horse water and feeding it, but it was clear that the animal needed more care than she could provide. Jack appeared as if on cue, carrying a bag of herbs and supplies. "I know a few remedies that might help," he said calmly. Clara's pride flared. "I don't need your remedies," she said sharply. Jack smiled faintly. "I'm not here to take over. Just offering a hand." The horse's condition didn't improve, and Clara finally found herself letting Jack assist. She worked alongside him, watching as he tended to the animal with steady, careful hands. It was the first time she had allowed someone into her world, and it left her feeling strangely unsettled. Over the next few weeks, Jack became a steady presence on the ranch. He didn't push, didn't demand, and never overstepped. Clara's stubborn nature clashed with the quiet support he offered, and their interactions were often filled with tension and playful arguments. "I'll never be your ranch hand," Clara declared one afternoon as Jack suggested a new way to repair the windmill. Jack chuckled, tipping his hat. "I'm not asking you to be mine. I'm just here to help." Clara crossed her arms, her eyes flashing with pride. "I can manage on my own. I always have." Jack didn't argue. He simply nodded and went about his work, leaving Clara to stew in her stubbornness. But that evening, when a sudden storm swept across the plains, Clara realized just how much she had relied on him without admitting it. The wind tore at the fences, and she found herself struggling to secure the gates. Jack appeared almost silently, helping her hold the wood in place until the storm passed. For the first time, Clara felt a flicker of humility. She had been so certain she didn't need anyone that she had ignored the simple truth. Even the strongest people sometimes needed help. She still didn't voice it aloud, her pride too stubborn, but the seed of change had been planted. As the storm cleared and the sun rose the next morning, Clara watched Jack working in the fields. There was something reassuring in his presence, something steady and reliable. She didn't understand it fully, and she wasn't ready to admit it, but she felt a strange sense of relief knowing he was there. The days went on, and the challenges of ranch life continued. Clara and Jack worked together, their bond growing slowly, built on respect and quiet understanding. They didn't speak of feelings or emotions. Clara was too proud for that, but a mutual trust began to form, and yet, every time Clara felt the pull of gratitude, she would tighten her jaw and remind herself she didn't need anyone. She was the ranch's master, its guardian, and its keeper. Jack could leave tomorrow and she would survive, but deep down she knew the truth. The ranch felt stronger with him there. She had been stubborn and proud, and she had swore she would never let anyone in. Yet despite herself, she had started to rely on him, even if she didn't admit it aloud. Part 1 ends with Clara standing on the porch at dusk, watching Jack move among the cattle. The wind whispered through the plains, carrying the scent of earth and grass. She knew deep in her heart that something had changed, but she wasn't ready to say it yet. Her pride still held her tight, and she clung to her independence. Yet a small uneasy feeling stirred inside her, a feeling that perhaps for the first time she might not have to face the Wild West entirely alone. The morning sun rose slowly over the plains, casting a golden light across the Dawson ranch. Clara Dawson had already been up for hours, tending to the animals and checking the fences that had survived the recent storm. Her hands ached, but she barely noticed. She was used to the long days and the constant work. Jack Hayes was already in the fields, guiding the cattle into a new grazing area. Clara watched him for a moment, noting how naturally he moved among the animals, his calm voice steady and sure. Despite her pride and stubbornness, she had begun to rely on him more than she wanted to admit. He was no longer just a stranger who lingered nearby. He had become a part of the rhythm of her days. The challenges of ranch life never paused, and this morning was no different. One of the fences along the northern pasture had collapsed during the storm, leaving the cattle dangerously close to wandering off. Clara tried to lift a heavy post herself, but it slipped from her hands, and she groaned in frustration. Jack appeared beside her almost instantly, his hand steady as he helped her lift it into place. "I told you I could handle this alone," Clara said sharply, though her voice held less confidence than usual. Jack didn't argue. "I know you can," he replied calmly, "but a little help makes it faster." Clara gritted her teeth but allowed him to assist. She hated to admit it, but things really did move more smoothly when he worked alongside her. The next few days were filled with a mix of hard labor and quiet companionship. Clara found herself watching Jack more often than she cared to admit. She noticed the way his hands moved with skill and care, the way he spoke softly to the animals, and the steady calm he carried even in the face of exhaustion. He didn't complain, didn't demand recognition, and never overstepped boundaries. Clara had met few people like him in her life. One afternoon, as they worked on repairing a windmill, a rider appeared on the horizon. Clara squinted and recognized the familiar figure of a neighboring rancher, someone who had a reputation for being competitive and a little aggressive. "Clara," the man called as he approached, "your cattle are getting close to my land. You need to keep them in check." Clara felt a flash of anger. She had been doing everything she could to keep the ranch in order, and now she had to deal with someone else's complaints. Jack stepped closer to her, standing silently by her side, a reassuring presence in the tension-filled moment. "I'll handle it," Clara said, her voice firm, though her hands trembled slightly. She led Jack toward the northern fence, which had already been repaired but needed careful attention to ensure the cattle didn't stray. As they worked together, Clara realized just how much she depended on him. She had always believed she could handle everything alone, but the reality of the situation was different. Jack's steady hands, his calm voice, and his practical skills made her life easier and less stressful. Yet she still refused to admit it openly. Pride was a stubborn companion. That evening, after the cattle were secure and the windmill repaired, Clara sat on the porch watching Jack move among the animals. She felt an unfamiliar pull in her chest, a mixture of gratitude, relief, and something she couldn't quite name. She didn't want to depend on anyone, and yet the thought of him leaving made her stomach twist with unease. The days passed, and the challenges continued. One morning, Clara woke to find that a sudden heat wave had dried the pasture more than expected, leaving the cattle thirsty and restless. She rushed to fill the water troughs, but the heat made the work exhausting. Jack appeared shortly after, carrying buckets of water and helping her refill the troughs. Clara's pride flared, and she started to protest. "I don't need you to do that," she said, though her voice was weaker than usual. Jack smiled faintly. "I know," he said. "I'm just helping." The truth was undeniable. She did need him. She had tried to convince herself otherwise, but the ranch was too big, the work too hard, and the dangers too many for one person to handle alone. The thought made her uneasy, but it also made her realize something important. Needing someone didn't make her weak. That evening, after the work was done, Clara found herself alone with Jack near the corral. The sky was painted with the colors of sunset, and the cool breeze carried the scent of grass and earth. Clara's heart raced as she struggled with her feelings. Pride and stubbornness battled against the raw honesty that was forming inside her. Finally, she could no longer hide it. "Jack," she said quietly, her voice almost a whisper. He turned to her, his eyes meeting hers, steady and patient. I don't want you to leave." Jack blinked, surprised but not offended. He waited for her to continue. "I know I've said I can do this alone," she admitted, her voice trembling slightly. "I've tried. I've wanted to. But I can't. Not without you." Jack smiled gently, a warmth in his eyes that made Clara's chest ache. "You don't have to do it alone," he said. "I'm not going anywhere." Relief washed over her, and for the first time in weeks, Clara allowed herself to breathe fully. She had been stubborn, proud, and fiercely independent, but she realized that strength could also mean knowing when to accept help. Jack wasn't there to take over her life or her ranch. He was there to walk beside her, to share the burden and make the work lighter. In the days that followed, Clara and Jack worked together more smoothly than ever. Their bond had shifted from reluctant partnership to mutual trust. Clara found herself laughing more often, enjoying small moments she had ignored before, the way Jack talked to the animals, the quiet companionship during long afternoons, the shared satisfaction of a job well done. The ranch began to thrive. The fences were repaired, the cattle were healthier than ever, and the garden that Clara had tended since her father's passing flourished in the warmth of the sun. Life was still hard, but it was no longer lonely. Clara had learned that accepting help did not diminish her strength. It enhanced it. One evening, as they finished securing the last of the cattle for the night, Clara watched Jack quietly. She noticed the way his eyes scanned the horizon, the calm confidence he carried, and the quiet kindness that defined him. She smiled, a small but genuine smile, feeling a warmth she hadn't felt in a long time. "Thank you," she said softly, almost to herself. Jack glanced at her, raising an eyebrow. "For what?" he asked, curious. "For staying," she admitted. "For helping." "For not leaving?" Jack's smile widened and he tipped his hat lightly. "It's nothing," he said. "I'm just glad to be here." Clara realized that his presence had become more than just help. It was comfort, safety, and friendship all in one. And deep down, she knew that this was exactly what she had needed all along. She had faced storms, hard work, and isolation before, but now she faced life with someone she could trust beside her. As the night settled over the plains, the stars twinkling above the ranch, Clara and Jack sat on the porch together. The wind carried the scent of earth and grass, and the world felt wide, open, and full of possibilities. Clara's heart was lighter, her spirit freer. She had been stubborn, she had fought to be independent, and she had sworn she would never rely on anyone. But in the end, she had discovered that true strength often comes from trusting others, and that sometimes letting someone stay was the bravest thing a person could do. And so, under the vast expanse of the Wild West sky, the ranch stood strong, the cattle safe, and Clara Dawson had finally learned that even the fiercest independence could coexist with companionship, trust, and the quiet, steady presence of someone who cared.